Alrighty, welcome back to the Defying Gravity podcast with Zach Goodman. Today we're going to talk about the power cleans or Olympic lifts for sports performance. Again, this is a podcast that is based around sports performance and building stronger, faster, more resilient athletes. So we're going to talk about an exercise that has been pretty popular for decades now, and frankly, why it's maybe not the best choice for you and your athletes. Um, so I think if we're going to start this off, we got to talk about where these power cleans came from. Why are they so popular? Okay, and where was kind of the original thought with these things? Okay, so looking back in kind of history, power cleans were originally used for circus feats of strength. A lot of strongman events were also kind of pulled from some of these circus feats of strength, and in general, they're a little bit non-traditional, right? So things like snatching, clean and jerks, zerkers, okay, things like that were originally kind of for circus acts and shows, okay. Um, so the power clean and full clean and jerk in general, they started to become pretty popular. And when the Olympics decided they wanted to add strength sports, Olympic weightlifting was added. So power cleaning or clean and jerks and snatches specifically were added to the Olympics. Okay. And so it became an Olympic sport and countries started to begin competing in these. Okay. And so because there is things in the line, right? There's country pride, there's medals and things like that in the line. Countries began trying to recruit athletes to do these events. Okay. So if we think back to the Soviet Union, they were studying how exactly they could win the most events possible. And so they figured out the strength sports were probably the easiest sports to kind of leverage training to build and to win gold medals. So countries, specifically in the Eastern Bloc, began to recruit athletes and begin putting them kind of into camps and training them to win these events and win these medals for their country. Okay. So this is kind of where the power clean started, right? It kind of started with the Olympics. Countries were competing in these events. Okay. They quickly kind of moved to athletics. Okay. And there's a couple different theories behind why they moved to athletics. Maybe it had to do with the Olympics and trying to compete with those. Maybe they were trying to pick out some of the best athletes by using power cleans. Again, the Olympic sports are for country pride, right? And so maybe we started to kind of push those power cleans into athletics to kind of identify which athletes were maybe the best suited to do them. And so kind of originally power cleans were used to kind of pick some of our best athletes, right? We want our best athletes to compete in sports in the Olympics so they can win. So we started pushing some different organizations as far as like information those go. Started pushing the use of cleans, snatches, jerks, things like that. Okay. To start identifying better athletes because, frankly, in the United States, we were getting our asses kicked. So over time, we've seen tons of studies come out about them. We've seen some studies that show some effectiveness with vertical jumps and things like that. While the correlations aren't always great, but again, they've kind of been really pushed on the scene of strength and conditioning. And so, frankly, they've showed some utility in some of the studies. But from what I've read and what I've seen over the last couple of decades, there really hasn't been any more correlation than anything else that's loaded. Kind of going back to the law of accommodation in relation to gravity. Anything that you load is going to be additional external resistance, which is going to create more force. So, I mean, really anything that you load could potentially lead to some carryover. And so, it didn't really show any, in my opinion, any additional utility and actually has pretty weak correlations compared to some of the other lifts we'll talk about, especially lifts that are kind of in conjunction with this power clean or full clean. Um, but along with these research studies coming out, again, like different strength conditioning associations really started to push this in their education, teaching coaches how to teach them, teaching coaches how to program them, things like that. And so, especially with football, with strength conditioning really taking over the college football scene with Nebraska, they began really pushing power cleans and really Olympic weightlifting derivatives for their strength and conditioning programs, along with the power lifts like benching and deadlifting like that. The cleans and the front squats and the jerks and the things, snatches, okay, all became kind of ingrained in that strength and conditioning culture for football development because football is really the first American football is really the first sport to really become kind of culturally aware of strength training and really start to use strength training and promote it. And, it started to become a big deal in athletics. I mean, you can probably think if you're into strength conditioning, if you're listening to this podcast, you probably are. All the different, cleaning videos like the Saquon Barkley 405 clean, like all over the internet, the media, we see tons of hang cleans and college football teams getting hyped. And, it's really became a part of the culture is to use some of these, especially the cleans, but to use some of these Olympic weightlifting derivatives to build athletes. So it's kind of been ingrained in the culture, which is why we've seen it last for so long. Um, and unfortunately, there hasn't been a lot of questioning about it. Many people kind of get into this. They find some sort of template or program or, what have you, and they just kind of run it. And, athletes' results they generally get better. So nobody really questions it. So there's a few problems with power cleans. And this is from what I don't understand is that these books and texts were written well before power cleans were really ingrained as a part of our strength conditioning culture. But people don't read the books. But okay, the biggest problem, I tweeted this out not too long ago, a conversation that I've had with other coaches and kind of the reason that the power cleans maybe don't have as much utility as we all think, is firstly, they're kind of the middleman. Okay. And so what I mean by the middleman is they're the middleman of velocity. Okay. So they are too fast to make us stronger. We know, especially if you listen to this podcast, we know that we have to lift heavy weights um, with maximum voluntary velocity. So we're lifting those weights as fast as we can, but the load, intensity, and gravity is making those weights actually move slow. So like my brief maximal tension work is all done extremely slow because we're lifting maximal to near maximal weights. We're pushing those as fast as we can, but frankly, they're ending up really slow because the load is just heavy, right? And so if you lift weights, you kind of understand how this works. We need to lift heavy weights to get stronger. Okay. And so power cleans are not a lift that is necessarily lifted heavy. You cannot clean, you can't power clean or snatch or hang clean anything really slow, right? It's a little bit too dynamic of an exercise to really do anything slow with it. And it doesn't have a lot of stability in it. So frankly, you're just not going to be able to grind and strain against a lift like that. Okay. And so generally these power cleans are going to be seen done traditionally, not optimally, but traditionally, somewhere between like 0.8 meters per second to 1.2 meters per second. Okay. We generally are going to see them kind of in that speed range. And when you start to look at the velocities of what's necessary to optimally kind of sharpen rate of force development, you're going to see they're just a little bit too slow. So I said they're too fast. Okay. So they're not going to make us stronger. If you want to get strong, you're going to have to lift slow. Okay. Not slow tempos, but you're going to have to use loads that create a slow velocity. Okay. But if you want to sharpen rate of force development, if you want to become faster to sprint, to jump, okay, you're going to need something that's pretty fast too. Okay. And by fast, I'm talking about 1.4 meters per second at the very slowest. Okay. So we said power cleans are generally going to be done right around that 0.8 to 1.2 meters per second. That seems to be what's traditional when you look at loading parameters and rep schemes that, you see most coaches around the country use. Most of them are using somewhere between like a 60 to 70% of somebody's back squat or something like that. So they're going to be a little bit too slow as well. Okay. So we need something really slow. Okay, slower than power cleans, so then we can strain and create more intervention between motor units, so then we can have access to more force. Okay, because we're going to integrate with new fibers. Okay, we also need to sharpen the discharge rates, so the rates that we can discharge motor units, the intervention stage. We need to kind of sharpen that rate that they can fire, so then we can produce force really fast. Okay, so in order to sharpen that kind of discharge rate for jumping and sprinting, it's going to have to be something that's really fast, right? A jump and a sprint are much more dynamic than a power clean or snatch or anything like that. And so what I was kind of mentioning previously about books that have kind of wrote about this, Zatsky and Bondarchuk have both said that power cleans or dynamic exercise to have correspondence to jumping and sprinting need to be at least over 1.4 meters per second, closer to 2 meters per second. Okay. So when you're talking at 1.4 meters per second is the slowest, upwards of 2+ meters per second, we're starting to see power cleans fall pretty short, right? At least traditionally, the way that they're programmed traditionally around the country, they're pretty slow. Okay. And again, this is referenced in multiple texts. I can pull those texts if people want to see them, but pretty sure I have a picture of one of them. But anyways, aside from that, other problems along with the velocity problem with them not really making us strong because they're too fast, but not making us way faster because they're too slow. We also have this whole technical, coordination type problem, right? I hate when coaches say they can't teach them. Oh, you can't teach them. That's why you don't use them. There's some validity to teaching an exercise that's very unstable, right? It's the same reason people like, running in sand doesn't really work and Bosu balls don't really work and things like that. Really unstable environments are not really going to work because there's so much instability. You really can't recruit enough motor units in action to create a powerful enough stimulus, right? So like using like the bamboo bar, if you're familiar with, some of the restoration type stuff that Westside uses, like using a bamboo bar or something like that, right? You're changing the load. You're still pushing that bar hard, but the load is so much lower because it's so unstable, right? And so it creates a more optimal environment to kind of recover. Same thing with using like a giant cambered bar. It's a little bit more unstable than a straight bar, so you're going to probably use less load, unless you're band rigging it up and things like that. It's the same reason the box squats work really well. Stability component creates more motor unit recruitment, along with the reactive contrast method we can use. But that's a different conversation. But because they require so much technical work, right? They're skilled. They're an actual sport, right? It's like if you were trying to pitch and throw a baseball, throwing a baseball is dynamic effort, right? But you're probably not going to go through the mechanics to throw a base, have all your kids throw a baseball. Like you're probably not going to teach them mechanically how to do that. Cleans are a sport. And so mechanically, you're going to teach them how to use it, or how to do it so they can even create enough velocity to do it, because there's not enough coordination. They're not going to be coordinated enough to create the velocities they need to see any sort of transfer. Okay. So what we start to see is, along with that, is there's not a high dynamic correspondence, right? So there, specificity, dynamic correspondence, however you want to say that, it's not going to have as much correspondence to activities seen in sport, right? In sport, we jump, we sprint. Okay. Those are going to be, have, some sort of loaded sprinting or loaded jumping are going to have much more dynamic correspondence, right? But you can't jump slow enough or sprint slow enough in order to create strength, which is why you have to use the power lifts. Okay. If you could jump slow enough, everybody would just jump, but you can't jump slow enough. Okay. So it becomes much more efficient just to squat. And so that kind of brings me to alternatives. So what do we do, right? We know the power cleans maybe are not the best option for us. If you're a coach that uses them, I'm sure you know they're a pain in the ass to teach to all the kids. Let's be real about that. But really, if you're a good coach, you're going to know how to teach stuff. If you are a coach that has invested a lot of time cleaning and things like that, you probably have good progressions. Again, if you can teach them, great. But why would you want to teach them that's less efficient? That's my biggest thing. It has nothing to do with teaching it. If anybody should understand how to teach power cleans and Olympic lifts, should be me, because that's where I started from. My original kind of entry into strength and conditioning and training was when I was younger. Okay, I did Olympic weightlifting. It's kind of my first entry in, is cleaning and doing snatches and hang snatches and snatch drops and push jerks and things like that. Okay, so this was kind of my first entry into strength conditioning. If anybody should be biased to those lifts, it should be me, just based off background. Okay, and I was biased for a little bit until I started to understand kind of some of these concepts. Okay, um, so as far as alternatives go, what type of alternatives? What's the solution to this problem? Enter dumbbell jumps. Okay, dumbbell jumps are going to be better for rate of force development, right? We can't jump slow enough to create strength. Okay, but this is going to be for rate of force. So this is how you're going to make your athletes faster. Okay, these are going to allow for a much faster stimulus because you're going to jump well over that 1.4 meters per second, especially if you jump high, right? The higher you jump, the more velocity you have to create to overcome gravity so you can stay in the air longer. Okay, so it's all just velocity, it's all just force. Okay, because all you're doing, you're just opposing gravity through force. You're just pushing through the ground to accelerate through the air, and the more force you can put to the ground, and a faster snap is going to, lead you to go up higher. Okay, and so if you're jumping with load, you're going to get external resistance, right? So you're going to create some additional external resistance to create a change. Okay, so you're going to overcome that law of accommodation of gravity. Okay, so we have to have some sort of load to overcome the accommodation of gravity because we're older. We have gravity constantly resisting us. That's why external resistance is a necessary thing. It's a necessary component to create more force, because just doing a bunch of body weight stuff, body weight jumps, is not going to elicit enough change to overcome accommodation. So you have to jump with load. Okay. And so jumping is going to be more dynamic in nature, right? It's a much faster movement because there's so much more displacement. This is another conversation people don't want to have about cleans, right? Everyone talks about displacement of the barbell and displacement of the triple extension and all that stuff, okay? There is much more displacement of load and mass when you are jumping, much more. It's not even close, okay? And what more displacement means is because there's more displacement, that means there is more force necessary for acceleration, okay? So if there is more displacement, there is more force necessary for acceleration, which is going to create a more potent stimulus. Okay. So the power cleans the whole, oh, the bar displaces more than a squat or deadlift, whatever. It doesn't fucking matter. It doesn't matter. You need to jump. If you want to have more acceleration, you want to sharpen that degree of acceleration, you need to have more displacement, and a jump is much more dynamic, which is going to create much more displacement, which means more acceleration. Okay. So dumbbell jumps are the answer. Okay. That's my solution. Okay. But I'll give you another one as well. Okay. But before I do that, we're going to talk about loads. So we're jumping. Many times people say, well, the clean, because that middleman is going to make it stronger, right? It's going to make it stronger. You know, we're going to use so much more load than a jump because you can clean, right? Why exactly would you want to use the clean to get stronger when people who are in the sport of clean and jerks and snatches do not use the clean and jerk and snatch to get stronger? Okay. What do Olympic weightlifters use to get stronger? They squat and they deadlift. Okay. Additionally, because there's more load, but it's also a lot more stable, so they can actually create more force. Okay. There's less of a stability component to just squat and deadlift. Okay. As well as the squat and deadlift are already a portion of the clean, right? So you're just breaking that kind of apart and actually getting more delivery, more efficiency through that. Okay. So we need to squat heavy. That's the end of the deal. If you want to get stronger, you're going to have to squat or deadlift heavy. It's going to have to be something that's heavy enough and slow enough to create more motor unit intervention, so you have access to new fibers and access to more force. Okay. So for people who, again, for Olympic weightlifters, they need to get stronger so they can clean and jerk more. Okay. Or snatch more. They squat all the time, right? You see excess of squatting 4 times a week or more. Some of them squat, 3 days a week, 4 days a week, 5 days a week, whatever. But if clean's made you strong, everybody would just clean, right? If you're an Olympic weightlifter, there's nothing more specific than clean and jerking. Okay. Because clean and jerking is a skill, just like every other sport. There's nothing more specific than clean and jerking. If it made you much stronger, nobody would even squat or deadlift because it wouldn't make sense, right? Why would you do something with less carryover? If I could just do the sport skill and that's all I need to do to get better at it, then that's what I would do, right? Why would you squat and deadlift if you didn't have to? If that's a worse stimulus, why would you do it? Because it's a better stimulus for strength. It gives them access to more force, so then they can display that in the clean and jerk or the snatch. Okay. So dumbbell jumps, squatting heavy. That's going to be the answer. Okay. Other thing that personally I really like, and I've seen a ton of carryovers, is the plyo swing. Okay. I know that many people don't have the plyo swing, but I do. So I'm going to share what I know about it. Okay. So again, this is another way I personally load jumps. I still do dumbbell jumps. Okay. But the plyo swing is a big bread and butter thing for me as well. Because not only do we get a loaded jump, we get that external resistance that you could have a dumbbell jump. We also get more stability because you're sitting inside of a seat, right? People often discount stability and its role in recruiting motor units to overcome gravity. Okay. It's the same reason why you can bench more on a Smith machine, something like that. There's just more stability, so you can actually create more tension in individual fibers. Okay. So we get more stability out of the plyo swing, so we can actually use a little bit greater loads, but we can jump really fast on it because there's just more stability. Okay. And so along with this, it's because there's more stability, it's going to lead to greater neural drive because we can just put more tension and more velocity with the fibers. Okay. We can just fire faster because we don't have to worry about stability components. Okay. Along with that, because we have a plyo swing, we also have access to accommodating resistance, which you really don't have access to if you're doing dumbbell jumps. I mean, you could probably rig something up, but personally, plyo swing is better. Okay. So we're going to be able to use accommodating resistance, which is going to increase elastic properties as well, because the bands are going to pull us back faster than gravity can pull us back alone because there's external resistance. When those bands snap, they pull you back fast. Okay. So you're going to get more neural drive and output on that plyo swing as well. Okay. And so it's going to actually create elastic properties, and it's going to train the foot and the ankle. Okay. This is the big key with the plyo swing, is that it trains the foot and the ankle to absorb not only the weight on the plyo swing, but also the dynamic resistance of the bands, but also gravity. So you're getting 3 different resistance types the foot and ankle are absorbing before they reproduce force and reaccelerate, right? So when you hit that plyo swing and you go out and you come back in, okay, those feet and ankles are your first point of contact to that kind of platform. Okay, so you're not only getting the load, external load, you're getting gravity, the external load, and you're getting a over speed eccentric on that plyo swing. Okay. And so what this is going to do is going to train the foot and ankle to absorb more force, which in general, they're actually accelerating. It's not decelerating training, it's accelerating because they're accelerating against the platform to, come to a stop, right? They're overcoming inertia through force into the pad. Okay. And so this is going to train the foot and ankle really, really good. Okay. You can do some other things with it. We do some single leg stuff with it. We do some pogos and stuff with it. But we use the plyo swing a little bit more traditionally, and I'll probably do an episode on the plyo swing and how we load it and program and all that stuff. But just for this, plyo swing's also great. Love it. Okay. Pretty much we do a ton of plyo swings, a ton of dumbbell jumping, along with some other plyometric type things, but really that's our bread and butter. Okay. And so kind of moving to the big picture on all this. Okay. We need something slow to get us strong. We need something fast to get us powerful. Okay. Because cleans are the middleman, that's the exact reason why they're bad. Many will argue that, oh, because the cleans are right in the middle, you're actually, developing this, certain portion of force velocity curve. That's all great. But if you're trying to shift an athlete's force velocity curve, you need to train extremes. You need to train something that's really freaking slow because it's really heavy. And you need to train something that's really freaking fast. Okay. You want to change it. You want to train the extremes. So you train the range. Okay. If you can train and increase both range or both extremes, you're going to actually shift an athlete's force velocity curve a lot more efficiently. And that's the goal. The goal is to not only give them access to more force, but to sharpen it so they can produce more force to overcome gravity. Okay. So we need to be able to shift an athlete's force velocity curve. If you're training only in the middle, you are missing out on the exact reason, the exact efficiency of making an athlete more powerful. Okay. So because cleans are the middleman, that's actually an argument that people make. That's actually a bad argument. That's actually the very reason they're not good. But if you understand velocities, it makes more sense. Many people don't understand math. Second thing, okay, Occam's razor, use simpler means. Okay. Oftentimes the simpler means are more effective, right? Especially when you're coming to athletes. Athletes are not, generally going to train, in excess of 4 or 5 days a week year round. Generally, they're going to go through phases of training really hard with a lot of effort for, more frequency, followed by, their sports season picking up and them having to train less or maybe not even training at all. So you need something that's simple, right? So then when they come in, they can get the right result right away. Okay. They don't have to wait for weeks and progressions and protocols to actually get some sort of change, right? They can get something that's relatively quick because time is money. Okay. Time is money for athletes. They don't have much. Okay. They're not specialists in lifting. They're oftentimes generalists and they just don't have the time to do all this stuff. Okay. And along with the simpler means, okay, we actually can put more effort and more, it's actually more productive because we're using simpler means. Okay. And generally it's just, again, we talk kind of about stability and things like that, but really it's just much simpler. It's much more efficient because it's much simpler and it has better correspondence to what's actually being tested. Okay. And you're cutting out all the time that is needed to teach something that's less effective, right? If I can get more results doing less, that means I have more room for other stuff. Okay. If you're spending part of your session doing clean progressions just to get to a lift that's actually less efficient, that's a bad deal. That's a very bad deal. If you're getting a more efficient stimulus and you don't have to really teach anything, why would you not be using that? Right? Why would you not? Because that means that you can put more effort and more investment of time into something else, right? If you're spending half of your session getting kids to clean and do all this shit, and then it's not even as good of a stimulus, it's actually a worse stimulus, that is an awful deal. Okay. So, big picture here, velocity, that's the problem. Okay, along with the time investment, it's also part of it, and just the means are not. It doesn't make a lot of sense logistically in many weight rooms too. I mean, you have to have enough space to clean and do all that stuff. It doesn't logistically make sense either. We see all these collegiate weight rooms that have like designed their weight room for Olympic lifts and it's fucking stupid, and they're leaving out things that are really important that they could have in the weight room for these cleans that are not even an efficient stimulus. And if you actually would track anything, if anybody would actually track stuff and test stuff, they would start to realize what things work and what things don't. And that's a big deal is that nobody really wants to track or test anything because they don't really want to know. They just want to get a degree, put their athletes through this program, and make a paycheck. They use strength and conditioning as a job versus a passion or a hobby. I don't do that. Okay. I just enjoy it. I really enjoy it. I'm not using it just for a job or just for an income. People come in and clock in and clock out in strength and conditioning. I enjoy the process of it, which is why I wanted to use something that's a little bit, more efficient. I actually care about the result because I test the stuff. And if we test stuff and doesn't get better, that's not a good look. Okay. So if you're not testing stuff, it's because you're avoiding the actual problem. You know they're not effective, but you're just doing what you were taught in school or, what have you. So that's kind of my opinion and kind of rant on the power cleans and stuff. I just don't see why they're still so popular, at least at the high school level. A lot of colleges, I mean, I have athletes that come back from college and they're still doing them, but a lot of them are starting to move more to dumbbell jumps. Great. I just don't see what's all the rage. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. When you start looking at velocity, it just makes no sense. But hopefully you enjoyed kind of my little mini rant on the power cleans and things like that. To me, if you're still power cleaning, that's a telltale sign you don't test anything, because you would see pretty quickly that they are not really having the effect that you hope they would have. Okay. But hopefully you enjoyed this episode on the Defying Gravity podcast. I appreciate you listening. Um, Definitely have a lot more coming. Our last guest on here, Jared Bidney, the episode was absolutely killer. People really enjoyed it. I have a really great guest lineup. I still have tons of people to come on. Some people that maybe you haven't heard from because you can't get them on podcasts very often, covered on this one. So I'm excited to share. Thank you so much for listening. Peace.